Hello and welcome back to Serpent Sunday. This week we're going to be taking a look at a very recently published study that asked the question, why did snake venom ultimately evolve? Was its primary function in predator avoidance or prey capture? Let's get started. This particular article was brought to my attention by my herpetology professor, who likes to share with us some recent news in the world of herpetology at the beginning of every class. The article we're actually going to be looking at is titled "Fangs for the Memories, a survey of pain in snakebite patients does not support a strong role for defense in the evolution of snake venom composition." And I will be linking that in the description down below if you are interested in reading the actual study. Now, because snake venom has been the most widely used venom in medical practices compared to other venomous animals, there are certain things that are already known about the venom of snakes. Specifically, that certain species of venomous snakes tend to have some sort of prey specificity in their toxin, meaning that their particular venom will affect their prey species a little more heavily than other animals that get envenomated. Some prey species have evolved a resistance to certain toxins in venom, turning the evolution into a sort of arms race between the predator and prey. Non-front fang snakes have a distinct disadvantage when venom is used for predator avoidance because that initial bite is not as likely to envenomate. Front fang snakes, in contrast to that, have tended to develop more warnings along with their venom, such as hooding in cobras, rattling in rattlesnakes, and some sort of bright coloration that you see in like coral snakes. And predators tend to avoid these front fang snakes. And this has also led to non-venomous species like king snakes that look fairly similar to coral snakes partaking in this Batesian mimicry, so that they are also avoided by the predators that have learned that this particular coloration and pattern is a warning of a venomous animal. Now, since the question they're asking is specifically, did venom develop for predator avoidance or prey capture, researchers had to develop some sort of baseline for what would indicate predator avoidance as a primary function of venom evolution. To do this, they looked at other examples in the animal kingdom. Specifically, when they were looking at almost all species of venomous fish, that venom has absolutely no function in prey capture. So it is solely for defense. When you look at a non-predator species like bees, they have venom, but clearly, if they're not a predator, they're not using that venom in any sort of prey capture, so their venom is, by definition, for defense only. They also looked at centipedes and scorpions, which are venomous animals that use their venom for prey capture. However, there is evidence to suggest that they also use it as a defense function, and that was one of the reasons it was developed. Specifically, in some centipedes, they have pain-inducing toxins that spark a pain response almost instantaneously. And looking at scorpions, they also have pain-inducing toxins. So upon the sting, there is pain almost immediately. Another thing that they look at when they look at those specific pain toxins are predators that specialize in feeding on venomous animals. They have developed some sort of defense to that venom and those toxins, so they don't necessarily feel the pain that would be triggered in another species. A good example of this are grasshopper mice that feed primarily on scorpions. they aren't really receptive to the toxins in scorpion venom. So that allows them to feed on the venomous animal without feeling the pain from the sting. Now, before the researchers actually conducted the study, anecdotally, they noticed that the pain specifically from snake venom seemed to take an extended time to be felt by people who ended up in the hospital from snake bites, and that there was some evidence that maybe some species have a pain toxin, but the presence of the toxin and actual pain felt hasn't really been studied. So that is still technically anecdotal as well. And the problem with exploring this specific question they're asking is that testing for the activation of those pain receptors that would pick up any pain toxin is time-consuming and expensive, as well as just because the receptors are triggered, it doesn't necessarily reflect actual pain felt in someone who has been exposed to that venom. So what they did to try to account for this is they essentially put out a survey. They specifically surveyed professionals in the field of herpetology and animal care that routinely handle venomous snakes. And what they're trying to account for by specifically only surveying that group of people is that it was helping to avoid any fear-related memories that may have hyperbolized the amount of pain felt by just an average everyday person who would have associated the particular bite with more fear and thus more pain when they look back on the memory. And the questions that they used in the survey were specifically trying to establish a severity of pain and the time frame in which the pain started to be felt after the bite actually occurred. And the whole survey covered a broad range of species and virtually all of the venomous families. The actual hypothesis of this study is a little bit twofold. First, they basically thought that venom developed even partially for predator avoidance would cause an almost instantaneous or critically early pain in order to allow the snake to escape quickly without serious injury, were this a wild specimen and an actual life or death situation. It's early to note here that early onset pain after a bite does not necessarily indicate protection as a primary function of the venom. It's just something that would be necessary were that a reason for the venom to have developed. The second part of their hypothesis addresses the fact that pain is subjective. I'm going to feel pain entirely different from anyone else watching this video is. However, if a venom was evolved even partially for a defensive function, there is going to be a pattern in the pain trajectory from patient to patient that will be consistent. And this essentially means that there will be a pattern in the intensity of the pain with a very high relative level of pain very close to the envenomation period that would either taper off or get more intense depending on what the toxin is. However, that initial level should be high. A good example of this is bee venom. When someone gets stung by a bee, there is a fairly fast pain response that is due to the venom. However, for some people, that pain is only going to last a couple of minutes and they might say it's not that bad, but another person might say that it's a very, very intense pain and they're going to feel it for a while. The pattern, however, here is that there is an intense pain at the beginning with a trackable pattern, even though two people might report a 3 or a 6 on the pain scale at the time of the sting happening, but the overall pattern is the same. Now, in the actual study, 584 bites total were surveyed. And one of the questions asked was, when did pain become too distracting for normal activity? And what they found was a little bit interesting. Now, for this pain to be ecologically crucial, or what would be considered fast enough for an animal to feasibly get away if the venom were developed for predator avoidance, the respondents would have to report that pain too distracting for normal activity have occurred in 5 minutes or less. Only 14.55% of respondents reported this. And those that reported that level of pain later than 5 minutes were only 30.82%. And the remaining 54.62% of the respondents said they never felt a pain intense enough to make normal activities impossible, or never felt a pain at all from the venom, which is interesting. Now, while researchers were compiling the data and making their graphs and charts to represent it, they did notice that there were two groups of snakes that did consistently provide a fairly early onset pain for those bitten. These two groups specifically were the New World vipers and members of the Elapidae family, so cobras and their very close relatives. Now, looking at the venom of the New World vipers, a lot of the toxins in those venoms break down tissues, so it makes sense that pain was felt because this venom does tend to start working fairly quickly, and breaking down tissues hurts. However, the pain that was felt was highly variable from person to person, so the researchers didn't necessarily feel that that was a particularly strong evidence as venom for a defensive function primarily. But when you look at the Elapidae family, their venom is highly neurotoxic in nature, meaning that it does attack the system that is going to perceive pain. And this particular clade or group of snakes may be the only one with a strong defensive purpose in their venom, especially when you look at animals like spitting cobras that actually do have a very defensive use for their venom. So overall, the study suggests that the evolution of venom in snakes was likely not primarily for defensive functions. They also noted that there's evidence when you look at venomous species that have started to feed on like bird eggs or fish eggs, their venom structures have become reduced when compared to other relatives in the same family, which would mean they no longer have a function for the venom, which is evidence that it was primarily evolved for prey capture, since just because they switched prey doesn't mean they wouldn't have to defend themselves. And biting and envenomation tends to be the last defense for snakes, especially in these species that have developed these warning signs like hooding and rattling and bright coloration that we mentioned before. So while venom definitely plays a role in defense, its primary function likely was not defense, since the act of biting itself puts the snake in more danger. All right, I've basically reached the end of this study at this point. Again, if you would like to go back and read it yourself, I have linked it in the description below. So I will see you guys all next time. Thank you for joining me in Serpent Sunday.
Thank you for watching this video.
Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you have not already done so. Also remember to follow me on all my social medias. The links are down in the description below, and check out the reptilegoth.com. If you found any value in this and you would like to support the channel, assuming you have the means to do so, go ahead and check out the Patreon. Again, that link is going to be down in the description below, just like everything else. See you next time.